I want to talk to you about war and peace for a moment. Your view on the two concepts are probably colored by your experiences and where you come from, or even where you live right now. Maybe even the games you play. If you've visited my channel before, you know that I play games where war is as normal as taking a breath, with thousands of soldiers fighting for my virtual empire while I sit in the comfort of my own home, risking nothing but carpal tunnel syndrome. As Erasmus once said, recalling the immortal words of the ancient Greek poet Pindar, war is sweet to those who have no experience of it. Friends, in this video, I'm going to focus on Europe in honor of Europe Day, May 9, 2021. I live in Norway, one of the safest countries on earth. Norway has not experienced war on domestic soil since 1945. Norway is located in Europe, arguably the safest continent on earth. If we look away from the Soviet oppression and the local ethnic conflicts in the Balkans in the 1990s, Europe's last total war also ended in 1945. Europe may mean a lot of things. It can mean the westernmost part of the Eurasian continent. Europe can mean a religious, cultural, and historical entity in which many smaller substates of Europe have been present for thousands of years. These days, Europe is often synonymous with the European Union, a collection of 27 independent states which have come together to form a larger whole. The citizens of the member states share under union law equal rights and may travel, live, work, and even run for office wherever they want within the union's borders. These rights are unprecedented in European history, but even more revolutionary, no European Union country has ever waged war on another, and there has been no war between the major powers of Europe since 1945, 76 years ago. Depending on who you are, 76 years might sound like an eternity, or not long at all. Everything is relative, but in European terms, at least in Western and Central European terms, 76 years of peace, the absence of war, is a very, very long time. Now let's go back in history for a minute. This is Europe during the time of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, in 117 AD, almost 2,000 years ago. It is the only time in history when Europe experienced a relative peace which is remotely comparable to our own time. Roman citizens could travel within the empire's borders, they bought and sold with the same currency, worked in the imperial assemblies, and citizens enjoyed many of the same rights, many even speaking the same language, either Latin, Greek, or both. At this stage, about 65 million people is estimated to have lived and coexisted in the Roman Empire. But Rome didn't last. Built on war and slavery, both internal and external strife ensured its decline, and the singular universal empire was later split in two, the decadent Western Roman Empire and the relatively prospering Eastern Roman Empire. But even these could not stand the test of time, even though the Roman Empire in the East lasted about 1,000 years longer than in the West. If we jump ahead to 1066, we may begin to recognize some of the borders of modern Europe. France, Germany, Scandinavia, Poland, and the British Isles are clearly recognizable. But we also do well to remember that the Middle Ages were times of constant warfare, of kingdoms and empires, of crusades and brutality. France and England would begin a relationship of rivalry, and you'd think a war called the 100 Years' War would make them both exhausted of the damn thing. But sadly, that's a naive thought. You see, Frenchmen and Englishmen slaughtered each other for another 500 years after that, until about 1914 when they both allied against Germany. Speaking of the French and the Germans, who at one point lived in the same Holy Roman Empire under Emperor Charlemagne, periodically waged war on each other ever since the breakup of the said empire. A true rivalry between the two began in 1806 after Napoleon invaded German lands and unilaterally dissolved the German-based Holy Roman Empire, which had lasted about 1,000 years. The Germans, of course, returned the favor in 1871, after vanquishing the French in the Franco-Prussian War, once and for all establishing a centralized German empire. 3 years ago, we marked the 100-year anniversary of the end of the First World War. This war was waged primarily between the French and the British on one side and the Germans on the other. But both Italy, the Russian, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire were heavily involved, and virtually every nation on the planet were forced into it in some capacity or another due to the world-spanning empires of the war's main actors. World War I lasted 4 years. That's 96 years less than the 100 Years' War between France and England. In the latter, it is estimated that between 2 and 3 million people died. Think about that. France and England slaughtered each other in the millions, with many more to come. World War I was a different beast. In only 4 years, an estimated 20 million people were killed, with another 21 million wounded. The First World War became the worst and the most brutal war in the history of mankind, until the next one broke out, only 20 years later. Now too, we're talking about the usual suspects: Germany, the Soviet Union, France and Britain, and of course countless other nations around the world. Around 75 million people is estimated to have perished in the war, which lasted between 1939 and 1945. For almost 2,000 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe experienced non-stop war and conflict. We have yet to even mention fateful wars like the 30 Years' War, the War of the Spanish Succession, and many others, not even including the colonial wars fought between the European empires. The reasons are many, and much more complicated than this video will manage to convey, but we can summarize them in a few concepts. Europe was at war with itself due to the ambition and carelessness of expansionist kings and emperors, religious fanatics, because of greed and lust for power, and more recent, due to the enormous influence of ideologies like nationalism and fascism. But something happened after 1945. Europe, the self-proclaimed beacon of civilization, laid in ruins after 2 self-inflicted and devastating world wars. For all its art, music, science, and technological progress, Europe had showed itself, perhaps not for the first time, to be a strong contender for the most brutal continent of them all. But on the 9th of May 1950, battered, wounded, but recovering, a radical new idea was put forward by French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman for a peaceful future for Europe. In his declaration, Schuman made clear that his aim was to make a new war in Europe not only unthinkable, but materially impossible. He declared, "World peace cannot be safeguarded without the making of creative efforts proportionate to the dangers which threaten it. The contribution which an organized and living Europe can bring to civilization is indispensable to the maintenance of peaceful relations. A united Europe was not achieved, and we had war. Europe will not be made all at once, or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements which first create a de facto solidarity. The coming together of the nations of Europe requires the elimination of the age-old opposition of France and Germany. Any action taken must in the first place concern these 2 countries." Within 2 years, 2 of Europe's former superpowers and greatest antagonists, France and then West Germany, decided to begin the process of letting history be history. France and Germany were joined by Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg, and together founded the European Coal and Steel Community, an organization meant to regulate and oversee industrial production under a central authority. It also established a common market for coal and steel among its members, which resulted in the end of the competition over natural resources needed for war production. And what happened next? Well, meetings, arguments, and hard and tedious negotiations, of course. Over years and years even. Doesn't sound too exciting maybe. But you know what? Not exciting is exactly what Europe needed. Not exciting was synonymous with peace and absence of war. For the first time in history, countries decided to relinquish aspects of national sovereignty to create a better whole, a stronger, more peaceful whole. In the end though, national sovereignty wasn't relinquished at all, but transferred from a place where sovereignty had been used to justify war and conflict
der deutschen Nation ist die Frage der Wiedergewinnung der inneren Kraft und Gesundheit des deutschen Volkes.
To a supranational stage where sovereignty meant the ability to maintain peace and stand stronger together in the pursuit of defending freedom and democracy. This is what we call the European project. The idea, the process, and the effort of European countries to see past their differences and slowly unify into something larger than each individual country. It began with the European Coal and Steel Community in 1952, evolved into the European Community only 5 years later with the Treaty of Rome in 1957, and finally became what we know it as today, the European Union in 1993. Now, you might have thought that everything was fine and dandy in Europe after World War II. That except for the Cold War between the West and the East, that all of Europe was free. But this is far from the truth. Spain suffered under the brutal dictatorship of Francisco Franco from 1939 all the way up until 1975. Greece did not become a true democracy until 1974 after the end of the military junta dictatorship, and Portugal finally completed its move towards democracy in 1976. These are some of Europe's largest countries, and they remained dictatorships until only around 45 years ago. Because the European Union requires that all new members adhere to democratic standards, it was therefore seen as a great leap forward when Greece was able to join in 1981, and when both former dictatorships Spain and Portugal became members in 1986. The EU has experienced a great number of enlargements, and it must be remembered that no country is ever forced to join the Union. On the contrary, the states themselves ask to join, and as a rule after referendums in each prospective member state. The single greatest enlargement happened in 2004, over a decade after the fall of the Soviet Union, when 10 former East Bloc countries joined the EU. Today, as of May 9, 2021, the EU consists of 27 member states, includes 450 million citizens, making it more populous than the United States, and is the second largest democratic entity in the world after India, and is arguably the most successful trading bloc in the world, with its very own currency. The move away from a Europe which looks like this to this is nothing short of remarkable. And even though it garnered laughter and smiles when a Belgian farmer accidentally moved the border between France and Belgium only a few days ago, all those living in Europe must never forget what a privilege it is to be able to laugh at such an incident. Another event occurring just a few days later, where Britain, who recently left the European Union, felt the need to send Royal Navy ships to an overseas territory off the coast of France because of a resource dispute, perfectly exemplifies what lies at the end of disunity and inward-looking nationalism. All of us owe a great deal to those who worked so hard to establish and maintain the peace we enjoy today, and the efforts which are still being made to create an ever closer union between the peoples of Europe. This is why I believe Europe Day is worth remembering, celebrating, and use as a beacon for further work. It is up to us to see this peace be eternal rather than temporary, to see our freedoms strengthened lest they be squandered and forgotten, and to stand up for the rights of everyone, whether they live in Europe or around the world. For Europe Day might symbolize the day when the European project of peace took its first steps, but its results echo across the world. And instead of war, Europe these days stand much closer to its Enlightenment era ideals than ever before, of being a continent of peace, justice, science, and democracy. But as with most things, we still have a long way to go before this rings true for everyone. As Robert Schuman declared, Europe will not be made all at once. And he was right. Now it is up to us to see that Europe is made at all, and that it becomes a Europe for all. Thank you so much for watching, friends. If you made it to the end, I hope my words were worth something to you. As always, if you enjoyed the video, I hope you'll leave a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. Happy Europe Day, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!